Elias Mercer did not mean to save anyone that morning. He came to town with dust on his boots, 2 cracked fence posts on his mind, and just enough cash in his pocket to buy a decent rifle before the next wolf came nosing around his calves. 10 minutes later, he was on one knee in a dark closet with a half-dead girl staring up at him through one swollen eye, her wrists tied behind her back, blood dried down her neck, and fear sitting in her chest like a loaded gun. She did not beg. She did not cry. She only looked at him as if she had been waiting to see whether he was one more man come to hurt her, or the first one foolish enough to pull her out. When her split lips finally moved, the word was so faint he almost missed it. Help. Elias cut the rope anyway. But as he lifted her off that filthy floor, he could already feel it in his bones. The trouble tied to her had not ended in that closet. It had only just opened its eyes. Dobson's outfitting stood at the edge of Flint Hollow like a tired old man refusing to die. The front windows were clouded with dust. A faded elk rack hung crooked above the door. Usually old Dobbs would be at the counter before sunrise, muttering over his account book or complaining about freight prices. That morning the shop was too still. The bell above the door rang hard when Elias stepped in, but no voice answered from the back. No stove heat. No pipe smoke, no scrape of a chair. The silence was wrong in a way clean rooms never were. He stood for a moment with his hat in one hand and let his eyes adjust. Rifles gleamed behind the counter. Cartridge boxes sat stacked straight. An open ledger lay beside the till, ink still wet on the page. That stopped him. Men did not leave wet ink and walk off cheerful. He called once. Dobbs. Nothing came back. Elias was not a curious man by nature. He had learned long ago that other folks' secrets could put a bullet in your back. Still, there were silences that asked to be tested. He moved behind the counter and toward the narrow side door marked gear. It gave under his hand. The smell met him first. Blood, sour sweat, something old and trapped. He stepped inside and saw tack hanging from pegs, blankets piled by the wall, a stack of bridles, a broken lantern on the floor. Then his eyes found her. She was crumpled in the far corner as if someone had thrown her there and forgotten she was made of bone. Her arms were pinned behind her with braided lead line. One shoulder was bare where her dress had torn. Her dark hair was stuck to her temple with blood. There were bruises on her cheek, her jaw, the hollow of her throat. One eye was nearly shut, the other fixed on him at once. For a second neither of them moved. Then Elias crossed the room, crouched low, and pulled his knife. Easy now. She flinched when he touched the rope, not from him, from memory. He saw it in the hard jerk of her breathing. The bindings had cut deep into her wrists. Her mouth was split. Her skin felt too hot. He sliced through the line and caught her before she pitched sideways. Who did this? Her throat worked. No sound came. He looked past her and saw a lump beneath the horse blankets. Every part of him went cold. He stood, yanked the blankets back, and found Dobbs sprawled on the boards, a hole under his ear and flies already collecting at the blood. The old man had been dead long enough for the room to sour around him. Elias stared one beat too long. Then the girl shifted on the floor and made a raw sound in the back of her throat. He went right back to her. No questions now. No weighing risk. He slid one arm beneath her knees and another behind her shoulders. When he lifted, pain tore through her face and a cry escaped before she could swallow it. She was light, far too light, like someone had been wearing her down a piece at a time. Sunlight hit them as he carried her out to the wagon. He tucked a canvas roll around her and climbed to the seat. Flint Hollow fell behind in a blur of wheels and dust. He did not look back at the shop. He knew enough already. A dead merchant. A brutalized girl. Men mean enough to leave one body hidden and another breathing. That last part bothered him most. Men like that did not leave witnesses by accident. Dr. Pike Harmon lived 4 miles east in Cedar Run, and Elias cursed every rut in the road before he reached the place. The girl blacked out halfway there. He checked twice to make sure she was still breathing. By the time the doctor came out to meet him, Elias had blood on his cuffs and murder in his thoughts. Harmon was lean and gray and built mostly out of disapproval. He took one look at the girl and called for hot water. No questions first, just work. Elias carried her inside and laid her on a narrow bed in the back room while the doctor cut away what remained of her dress and clucked under his breath at injuries he did not name. Elias waited on the porch through most of the morning. Horses came and went, a boy with a fever, a ranch hand with a nail through his palm, a widow collecting cough syrup. The world kept moving. It annoyed him. Near noon the doctor stepped outside and shut the door behind him. She'll live. Elias let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. How bad? Bad enough, Harmon said. Beaten, starved, cracked ribs, left wrist fractured, rope cuts deep, burn mark on her upper thigh. Elias looked up sharply. A brand. The doctor nodded once. Double R set inside a circle. You know it. Yes, he knew it. The Rourke brothers ran cattle south of the old rail break near Ash Creek. Barrett and Wade Rourke, respectable to the newspapers, generous to church collections, deadly in the dark. Everyone in 3 counties had heard the stories: stolen stock, vanished drifters, young girls who went missing between one town and the next. Nothing ever stuck because too many men owed them money or fear. Hell, Elias said softly. You found her with Dobson? Harmon asked. Found Dobson too. Shot behind the ear. The doctor's mouth flattened. Then whoever did this will come asking questions. Elias turned his head and looked through the dusty porch rail toward town. Let them. That answer sounded harder than he felt. The truth was simpler. 6 years earlier, his wife had gone into Ash Creek to buy flour and lamp oil. She never made it home. They found her the next morning in an irrigation ditch, bruised throat, broken fingers, mud in her hair. Folks whispered she must have seen something she should not have seen. No one said the Rourke name out loud. Elias had said it enough for all of them. It changed nothing. The sheriff had looked tired. The judge had looked away. The grave on Elias' land stayed full. By evening, the girl woke screaming. He was inside before the doctor reached her room. She had twisted halfway off the bed and was clawing at the blanket with her good hand, eyes wild, breath tearing in and out as if she were still in that closet. Elias stopped 3 feet away. He did not touch her. He knew better than that. You're safe here. Her gaze snapped to him. For a long second she did not seem to understand the words. Then the room came back to her in pieces. The basin, the lamp, the doctor, the clean sheet, her breathing slowed by force. Harmon gave her a bitter draft and went back out muttering. Elias stayed where he was. At last she looked at him properly, not with gratitude, not yet with measurement. He respected that. You got a name? He asked, her lips parted. Nothing. He waited. When she finally spoke, the sound was thin and rough from thirst. Wren. It was either the truth or the best lie she had strength for. Elias nodded like it was enough. I'm Elias Mercer. She closed her eye again, as if even that small exchange had cost her. He turned to leave. Behind him her voice came once more, almost too low to hear. You know that brand? He stopped. Yes. After a pause she said, Then you know they won't stop. Elias looked back at her. Candlelight caught the bruises on her face and the fierceness still alive beneath them. That was when he understood something the doctor had missed. She was hurt. She was exhausted, but she was not broken. Something inside her had stayed standing even after everything. No, he said, men like that never stop on their own. Her eye held his. There was memory in it, pain too old for her age, and beneath both a promise sharpened by suffering. Outside the town settled into dusk. Wagon wheels thinned. Dogs barked somewhere down the road. A church bell rang supper time. Ordinary sounds, harmless sounds. Elias had never trusted ordinary sounds after dark. He moved to the window and watched the street below. 2 riders had come in from the south not 10 minutes ago. He knew neither horse, but he knew the kind of men who sat them. Loose shoulders, watchful eyes. One of them had looked toward the doctor's porch too long. Behind him, Wren shifted against the pillow. They're already here, aren't they? Elias rested one hand on the window frame. Maybe. She gave a dry little laugh with no humor in it. Not maybe. He turned from the glass. Then we'll be ready. He had not meant to say we. The word hung between them anyway. Wren heard it, so did he. Neither took it back. The lamp flame trembled once in the draft. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled over the hills, low and mean. Elias set his hat back on his head and checked the revolver at his hip. He had ridden into town for a rifle. Now night was coming on, and he had a wounded girl upstairs, 2 dead men behind him, and the Rourke brand staring back at him from the past like an old grave kicked open. He stepped toward the door, then paused. Try to sleep. Wren kept her good eye on him. I don't sleep much. No, Elias said. I reckon neither do I. He went out onto the porch and took the chair beside the door with his shotgun across his knees. The street darkened one window at a time. Hoofbeats passed once, then faded. He sat there listening to the boards creak under his weight and feeling the old rage wake up inside him slow and steady. By midnight, he was no longer wondering whether trouble would come. He was wondering how many men he would have to kill when it did. Morning came gray and slow over Cedar Run, but Elias Mercer had not slept enough to call it rest. He stayed on the doctor's porch until first light, shotgun across his knees, eyes on the road. Twice riders passed through town. Once a wagon stopped at the trough across the street and lingered too long. Nothing happened. That almost made it worse. Men like the Rourkes liked fear to arrive early. It softened the ground before the first blow fell. Dr. Harmon found him there with a cup of black coffee and a face full of contempt. You look like death. I feel a touch better than that. The doctor handed him the cup anyway. She's awake again, still breathing hard. Still listening to every board creak like it's a gun being cocked. Elias stood at once. Harmon caught his sleeve. If you go in there, don't crowd her, don't talk too much, and don't make promises men like you can't keep. Elias pulled free. That advice cost extra. It should. Wren was sitting up when he entered the room. She had one blanket around her shoulders and both feet on the floor, though her left hand shook where it braced against the mattress. Someone had washed the blood from her hair. It was darker than he first thought, almost black in the weak light, cut ragged near one temple where it had dried into the wound. The swelling had gone down enough for him to see her face more clearly. Young, yes, but not as young as he first guessed in the closet. Maybe 20. Maybe clothes. Pain had a way of stealing years and adding them back wrong. She looked at the tray on the bedside table as if it had insulted her. You should eat, Elias said. She glanced at him. You sound like him. Harmon says that to everybody. He says it like he's angry food exists. That caught Elias off guard. It was not much, but it was the first edge of a real person beneath the bruises. He moved to the chair near the wall and sat down, careful to leave space. After a moment, she picked up the spoon and forced herself through a few bites of broth. Her hand trembled worse at the third swallow. She set the spoon back down. Enough. You won't heal on stubbornness alone. Her good eye narrowed. I've come this far on it. He could not argue with that. He watched her for a moment, then reached into his coat and laid a small notebook on the table beside the bowl. The cover was worn red leather, stained at one corner. I found this tucked beneath the wagon canvas after I brought you in. She looked at it but did not reach right away. When she finally did, her fingers rested on the cover as though she were touching a grave marker. She opened it and checked the pages quickly. Relief crossed her face before she buried it again. You didn't read it. No. You should have. That surprised him. Why? Because then you'd know what kind of trouble you're in. Elias leaned back in the chair. I have a fair idea already. Wren closed the book and held it in her lap. The room went quiet. Outside, a mule brayed in the alley. A cart rolled past. She kept her gaze on the window. My name isn't Wren. He said nothing. It's Adelaide Voss. He waited. My brother's name was Silas, she went on. We worked together. Small jobs, card tricks, loaded dice. A fake watch chain once or twice. Enough to eat, not enough to hurt anyone. Then one night we crossed into land the Rourkes already bled dry. We didn't know it till they took him. Her voice stayed steady in a way that made the words feel even worse. She spoke like someone reading names off a church wall. They tied him to a pine outside their south pasture and cut his shirt open. Barrett held him. Wade used the iron. They branded him first so folks would see who owned the warning. Then they opened him up and left him for the crows. Elias felt his jaw lock. I went back later, Adelaide said. I was stupid enough to think I could learn their habits, learn their roads, maybe put a bullet where it counted. I kept low, changed my name. Found work sweeping up at Dobson's shop because men talked in front of Dobbs. They trusted him. He listened. He knew what kind of men the Rurks were. He tried to help you. A small nod. He heard enough to know I was planning something. Said he could get me north to a judge in Laramie who still remembered the meaning of law. We were meant to leave the morning after you found me. So someone tipped them. Yes. She said it plain. No tears, no shake in the voice. That kind of control never came cheap. Elias looked toward the door, then back at her. How much did Dobson know? Enough to die for it. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. I buried my wife 6 years ago because she saw something the Rurks wanted buried too. Adelaide lifted her head. This was the first time he had offered that part of himself without being asked. Her name was Ruth, he said. She taught letters to ranch kids out near Wolf Pass. Good woman, gentle, smarter than me in every way that mattered. She went into Ash Creek for supplies and never came back alive. Folks whispered she must have had bad luck. I heard enough to know luck wasn't the word. Adelaide watched him without blinking. You ever prove it? No. You ever stop knowing it? His laugh held no warmth. No. The truth settled between them like another person in the room. Not comfort. Something harder. Recognition. That afternoon Harmon insisted Adelaide try walking. She hated needing help and made no effort to hide it. Elias offered an arm once. She ignored it once. On the second step her knees buckled and she caught herself against the wall with a hiss of pain. He put his hand beneath her elbow before she could argue. She stiffened, then let him steady her. Together they moved the length of the room and back. Her breathing turned sharp halfway through. Sweat stood out at her brow by the time she reached the bed again. Tomorrow, Harmon said, you'll do it twice. I'd rather be shot. The doctor gave her a dry look. You nearly were. Elias almost smiled. Adelaide did not, but he saw the corner of her mouth twitch before it vanished. By late day word had begun to spread. Cedar Run was too small for silence. A dead merchant, a stranger girl in Harmon's back room, Elias Mercer sleeping with a shotgun across his lap. People asked questions with their eyes first, then with their mouths if they were foolish. Most got nothing. One man from the feed store lingered by the porch rail and mentioned seeing 2 riders with Circle R tack just past the water tower. Elias thanked him and went straight to the stable. He saddled his horse near dusk. Adelaide was at the window when he came in to fetch the spare cartridges from the chair. You're going out. Only to look. That's how men get killed, by looking one hill too far. He paused. I can't sit and wait for them to choose the ground. She turned from the window slowly. Then don't go alone. He stared at her. She was pale from the effort of standing, one hand pressed to her ribs, but her eye was clear. You can barely cross a room. I wasn't offering to ride tonight. What were you offering? Adelaide stepped closer to the table and opened the red notebook. Several pages were filled with tight, neat writing. Names, dates, small map marks, supply routes, places where wagons vanished, deputies who looked the other way, freight numbers, a pattern built out of patience and anger. I was offering what I know, she said. Barrett drinks when he's pleased with himself. Wade drinks when he's bored. The men under them change shifts at the South Line every 3rd night. There's a wash east of their main house, where the fence runs low after heavy rain. Their store ledgers don't tell the full story, but the freight wagons do. If you ride blind, you'll die blind. Elias stepped to the table and looked down at the pages. This was not a wounded girl clutching revenge like a fever dream. This was work. Hard, careful work. The sort that took months. You built all this yourself. Silas started some of it. Dobson helped me fill pieces in. The rest I did while pretending to sweep floors. He looked at her then, really looked, not as a victim, not only that, as someone who had survived by sharpening grief into use. "All right," he said quietly, "then we do this with our eyes open." She held his gaze. "We." Again that word. Again neither of them pulled away from it. He took a folded paper from inside his coat and laid it beside the notebook. It was an old hand-drawn map of ranchland south of Ash Creek, marked with pencil scars and old fence lines. "I've got names too," he said. "Not enough, but some. Men who lost wives, men who lost stock, a blacksmith whose jaw weighed shattered over a water tax, a widow outside Miller's Gap whose son vanished after refusing to ride freight. I kept the names because I didn't know what else to do with them." Adelaide touched the map with the tips of her fingers. "You were waiting." He thought of Ruth's grave, of years spent watching and saying nothing because saying it alone changed nothing. Maybe. She looked back up, then stopped waiting. The room held still around them. Outside, dusk deepened. A horse stamped in the stable yard. Someone laughed in the street below and kept walking, far from this room and the hard thing growing inside it. Elias gathered the map and slid the notebook back to her. "Tonight I ride to the ridge above Ash Creek and count lights." Adelaide gave one short nod. "Then count riders too. Barrett keeps 2 men near the bunkhouse after dark and another by the feed shed if he's nervous." "You sound like you've been inside their yard." "I have." He did not ask for more. Not yet. Her hand had started to shake again and the bruise along her jaw had gone pale with strain. At the door he stopped. "Lock this behind me." "Harmon keeps the key." "Then wedge the chair under the handle." Adelaide almost told him she did not scare easy anymore. Then she thought of the closet, thought of rope biting skin, thought of Dobbs' face down in the dark. She swallowed the pride. "I will." When Elias stepped out, he heard the chair drag into place behind him. That sound followed him all the way to the stable. He rode south under a sky the color of old iron. The road bent through scrub and broken stone, then climbed toward the ridge where cedar gave way to open grass. Below him, after a long hour, the work spread came into view. Main house, bunkhouse, corrals, tool sheds, lanterns burning in patterns he had not studied closely enough before. He lay low in the brush and counted every moving light. Then he saw one lantern swing loose from the line and move north. A rider, then another, not searching the ranch, leaving it, coming toward Cedar Run. Elias pulled back from the ridge, turned his horse hard, and rode for town with the cold certainty that the waiting was over. Elias rode hard enough to lather the horse by the time Cedar Run showed through the dark. The town had gone quiet in that dangerous way small places did after supper. A lamp still burned in Harmon's front room. The hitch rail stood empty. No one on the boardwalk. No drunk voices from the saloon. Just the scrape of wind along the street and the sound of his own horse breathing. He swung down before the porch and took the steps 2 at a time. The chair was still jammed beneath Adelaide's door. He pushed inside and found her sitting upright on the bed with a revolver in her lap. For one quick second both of them froze. Then she let out the breath she had been holding. "You took too long. There are riders coming north. I heard one pass an hour ago, then another not long after." Elias shut the door and crossed to the window. "You see them stop." "No, but one horse slowed near the porch. I kept the lamp low and stayed quiet." He looked back at her. The revolver sat steady in her good hand, though her face was pale from strain. On the chair beside the bed lay the red notebook open to a page of names and routes. She had not been waiting helpless. She had been preparing. Harmon no. He knows enough to mutter at walls and load his own shotgun. That almost made him smile. Almost. Downstairs a floorboard popped, then another. Harmon's tread, heavy and irritated. A minute later the doctor opened the room door without knocking. "If you're both done staring at each other, there's a horse outside I don't like the look of." Elias moved first. He took position near the front window while Harmon killed the lamp. Adelaide started to rise. Pain crossed her face so fast it looked like anger. Elias shook his head once. "Stay here." Her eye flashed. "No. Your ribs are still trying to knit. And yours aren't bulletproof." That shut him up. Harmon swore under his breath. "I don't have time to referee stubborn fools. If they come through the front, Mercer, you take the left side. Miss Voss, you stay back from the glass unless you enjoy dying for no purpose." Adelaide stood anyway, slow this time, measured. She pressed one hand to the edge of the dresser until the room stopped moving beneath her feet. Then she took her place beside the far wall where she could see the hall and the window both. Outside, hoofbeats stopped in front of the porch. One rider, no, two. Elias thumbed back the hammer on his shotgun and waited. A knuckle hit the front door below. 3 slow knocks, not the polite kind. The kind men used when they expected fear to answer. Harmon called down the hall, voice dry as old bark. "Closed." A pause, then a man answered from outside. "Dr. Harmon, we heard tell you were treating a hurt woman." Elias felt Adelaide go still behind him. It was not panic, it was recognition. He turned his head just enough to catch her face in the dark. She mouthed one word, "Wade." The doctor did not move. "I treat plenty of hurt folks. We'd be obliged if you'd let us ask after her." "No." The porch boards creaked beneath shifting weight. Then another voice came, smoother, colder. "We aren't asking twice." Adelaide lifted the revolver a little higher. Elias saw her wrist tremble, but the barrel did not. Harmon drew breath through his nose. "Then I reckon you'll be disappointed once." The shot through the front window came a heartbeat later. Glass burst inward. Elias dropped to one knee and fired through the frame before the echoes died. A horse screamed outside. Someone cursed. The night erupted all at once. Another shot chewed through the porch post. Harmon answered from the hallway with both barrels and drove the front step into splinters. "Back door," Elias snapped. He did not wait to see whether either of them listened. He crossed the room, threw open the rear hall window and looked into the yard, clear enough. A rain barrel, woodpile, narrow lane to the stable. If they stayed, the place would become a coffin. He turned. Adelaide was already moving, not fast, not clean, but moving. Harmon grabbed a satchel from the peg by the door and shoved it at Elias. "Bandages, laudanum. If she falls apart, that's your problem." "You coming?" The doctor reloaded with hands that did not shake. "This is my house." "Eli?" Adelaide stopped to catch breath against a stab in her side. "If Wade is here, Barrett may not be far behind." That decided it. Harmon spat into the corner. "Fine. I'll hate every minute of this." They slipped down the back stair and into the yard just as another volley tore through the front of the house. Elias put Adelaide ahead of him, one hand at her elbow, the other holding the shotgun low. Harmon brought up the rear with the fury of a man offended by the whole business. They had nearly reached the stable when a rider cut across the alley from the east. Moonlight caught his hat brim, the pale horse, the rifle coming up. Adelaide did not hesitate. She fired once. The rider jerked sideways and pitched from the saddle into the dirt. Elias stared at her. "Next time," she said through clenched teeth, "don't tell me to stay in bed." There was no time to answer. More voices rose out front, men dismounting, men spreading out. Elias got Adelaide into the stable and barred the side door behind them. Inside it smelled of hay, leather, old manure, and horse sweat. Safe enough for one breath, not two. "Horses," he said. Harmon snorted. Marvelous thought. They saddled in darkness broken only by moonlight through the slats. Elias worked fast, fingers sure even with gunfire cracking outside. He threw a blanket roll across one mare, tied Harmon's satchel behind the cantle, then turned to find Adelaide trying to tighten her own cinch with one hand. He stepped in. "Let me." "I can do it." "You can barely stand." She shot him a look full of sparks and hurt pride. Then the pain won and she let him pull the strap tight. The stable door shuddered under a blow. One of the workmen had found them. Elias handed Adelaide the Henry rifle from the wall rack. "You remember how?" Her face changed a little, not softer, sharper, more alive. I remember everything. The bar jumped again. Wood cracked near the hinge. Harmon led his horse to the rear stall and kicked the rotten plank wall. It gave enough to show darkness beyond. Out here. They pushed through one by one into the narrow strip behind the stable. Elias boosted Adelaide up first. She bit back a sound when her ribs caught. Then she was in the saddle, jaw tight, rifle across her lap. Harmon mounted clumsily for a man always complaining about joints. Elias swung up last. The stable door burst inward as they broke into the lane. Shots followed them at once. A lantern flared by the alley mouth. Wade Rourke sat a black gelding there, one hand on the reins, the other lifting a pistol. He was broader than his brother, heavy through the shoulders, his beard clipped short, his smile ugly even at distance. "Bring her back," he called. "Alive if she's willing." Adelaide turned in the saddle and fired before Elias could. The bullet clipped Wade's hat clean off and sent it spinning into the dust. He laughed. That sound crawled over Elias' skin. Then they were riding full out through the back end of Cedar Run, across the wash into open dark. The chase stretched long behind them, hoofbeats, shouts, one lantern, then three. Elias took the lead where the trail split near the dry creek. He knew this ground better than any man south of Wolf Pass. He veered left through a stand of cedar, ducked under low limbs, and led them into stony country where horses had to choose each step. The riders behind kept coming, but slower now. Adelaide held on in grim silence. Twice her mare stumbled. Twice she steadied it. Once Elias looked back and saw blood darkening the bandage at her side where strain had reopened something not ready to heal. They rode another mile before the voices behind them thinned. Then another. At last Elias pulled up in a shallow cut between two rock rises where brush hid the opening from the trail. Everyone listened. No hoofbeats, no shouts, only wind moving through grass and the hard, fast breaths of tired horses. Harmon slid from his saddle with a curse. "I've had worse evenings, but not many." Adelaide swayed. Elias was on the ground before she could slip. He caught her around the waist and lowered her carefully. She tried to step away from him out of habit or pride, maybe both, but her legs betrayed her. He took the weight without comment. "You tore something," Harmon said. "I know." The doctor snapped open his satchel and pointed to a flat stone. "Sit." She sat. He worked by lantern, hooded in his coat, fingers brisk and unsympathetic. Elias stood watch while the bandage came off and the new one went on. Adelaide made no sound through it. Not when the doctor cleaned the wound at her side. Not when he pressed at her ribs and muttered about cracked bones and idiots on horseback. Only once did her hand close around Elias' sleeve where he crouched beside her, and even then she dropped it the moment the pain passed. When Harmon finished, he poured a little water over his hands and looked at them both. "You understand this changes things." Elias kept his eyes on the darkness outside the cut. "It already did." "No," Adelaide said quietly, "this ends pretending." That made both men look at her. She had gone white from pain, but her voice had steadied again. The rifle lay across her knees. Her hair had slipped loose around her face. There was dried blood at the corner of her mouth where she must have bitten down hard to keep from crying out. She looked young for one heartbeat. Then the fire came back into her eye. "Wade knows I'm alive," she said. "He'll carry that to Barrett if he hasn't already. They won't stop at Cedar Run now. They'll shake every town between here and the rail line. They'll pay men to ask questions. They'll pay others not to." Elias nodded once. He had known it on the ride, but hearing it aloud sealed it. Harmon corked the flask and shoved it back into the satchel. "Then where do you intend to go?" Elias answered before he fully thought it through. "My place." The doctor barked a humorless laugh. "You mean the ranch 10 miles from nowhere with one good well, one bunkhouse, and enough open ground for trouble to see you from half a county away?" "That's the one. It'll make you a target." Elias met his gaze. "I already am." Adelaide looked between them. "If I go there, they'll come because of me." "They were always coming," Elias said. That silence after held a different shape than the others had. Not fear this time. Choice. At last Harmon sighed the sigh of a man giving up on reason. Then we move before dawn. If they circle back and find this cut, I don't care to die crouched beside a mule trail. He settled with his back against a rock and hat over his eyes, which passed for sleep in men like him. Elias moved to the edge of the brush with the shotgun and took first watch. After a while he heard Adelaide shift behind him. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." He looked over his shoulder. She had not laid down. She sat against the stone with the blanket around her shoulders and the rifle still near at hand. Moonlight found her face in pieces, the bruise on her cheek, the set of her mouth, the exhaustion she refused to yield to. What was Wade doing there tonight? Elias asked softly. Adelaide stared out into the dark. "He likes to finish what he starts." "And Barrett?" "Barrett likes to own what other men fear." Elias turned that over. After a moment she said, "Silas once told me there are men who hurt people for gain, and men who hurt people because they enjoy hearing what pain sounds like. The Rurks are both." He did not answer. There was nothing to add to truth that ugly. A little later she spoke again, quieter now. "In the closet when you first saw me, I thought you were him." "Wade." "No, the other one." Elias glanced back. "Their quiet man," she said, "the one who never shouts. Never drinks much, just stands near the wall and watches. He held the lantern when they beat Dobbs. He stepped on my hair when I tried to crawl. He told me no one would come." Cold moved through Elias in a slow line. "You know his name?" Adelaide shook her head. "No, only his voice." Elias looked out over the black land and thought of all the men a place like this could hide. Hired blades, old soldiers, drifters who learned cruelty before farming. The Rurks were bad enough. A man like that made them worse. Behind him, Adelaide drew the blanket tighter. "He'll come too." "Then let him." She watched him a moment. Something unreadable passed through her face. Not trust exactly, but the beginning of something that might become it if both of them lived long enough. By the time dawn began to thin the eastern sky, Elias had made up his mind about more than the ranch. This was no longer about survival. It was about taking apart the men who had built their power on terror and making sure nothing of it stood when the dust settled. They reached Elias Mercer's ranch just after sunrise, with the light coming hard over the eastern rise and turning the dry grass pale gold. The house sat alone against the land, built from weathered pine and stubbornness, with a low barn to one side and a bunkhouse behind it that had not held hands in years. A windmill turned slow above the well. The place looked quiet, almost harmless. Adelaide knew better. A lonely place could protect you, but it could also leave you nowhere to run. Elias helped her down from the saddle without a word. She hated how much her body leaned into the help before she could stop it. The ride had left her side burning and her ribs tight as iron hoops. Dr. Harmon climbed down next, muttering about every bone in his back, then marched toward the porch as though bad temper alone might keep death off the property. Inside, the house was clean in the way only one careful man could keep it. Not fancy, just ordered. A wood stove near the wall, a scarred table. 3 straight-backed chairs, shelves with tin cups lined even, a Bible on the mantel beside a small china bowl filled with nails. Over the hearth hung a framed photograph of a woman with calm eyes and a steady mouth. She wore a simple dress and sat with one hand folded over the other as if she had all the time in the world. Adelaide stopped looking before Elias caught her at it. "I'll take the back room," Harmon said. "It's got the best light for changing bandages and the worst mattress for mercy." Elias pointed down the hall. "Use it." The doctor disappeared at once, and Adelaide stood alone in the center of the room with dust on her boots and pain pulling at her breath. Elias crossed to the stove and poured water from a kettle into a basin. "You can wash up if you want." She looked down at herself. Borrowed skirt, loose shirt, dried blood at the cuff, road dust across the hem. She smelled like horses, sweat, and old fear. That would be a change. He set the basin on the washstand in the back room and left her to it. The water turned pink first, then brown. She worked slowly, careful around the cuts at her scalp and the deep bruises at her ribs. When she peeled off the bandage from her thigh to look at the brand, anger ran through her so sharp it almost helped. The mark had healed ugly. 2 crooked M-like lines inside a circle in the old version. Now in this new life it had become the same cruelty under another name. Ownership burned into flesh. Men who did that believed they could stamp the soul too. When she came back into the main room, Elias had eggs on the stove and coffee on the table. He looked up once, then looked back down, giving her the dignity of not staring. She noticed things anyway. The extra cup already poured. The chair pulled out. The way he moved around the room without noise for a man his size. Harmon joined them a minute later and ate like a man who had ridden all night and intended to live through the next one too. By noon the ranch no longer felt empty. The first visitor came on a mule with one lame hind leg and a sack of horseshoes tied behind the saddle. Jonah Pike, the blacksmith Elias had mentioned in Cedar Run, was bigger than the doorway and twice as scarred. One side of his jaw was shiny with old burned tissue, the skin pulled tight from ear to chin. He removed his hat when he saw Adelaide and gave one plain nod. No pity in it. She appreciated that. Heard the doctor's place got lively, Jonah said. That word for it. Elias asked. It'll do till I think of one meaner. He set a wrapped bundle on the table. Inside lay cartridges, a box of percussion caps, and a short-barreled shotgun that had seen ugly service. Not charity, contribution. The next to arrive was a woman in a dark traveling coat with flour dust still clinging to the cuff. Me Holloway, widow, baker, eyes like sharpened steel. She came in carrying 2 covered pies and a cloth sack that clinked when she set it down. 1 pie for supper, she said. 1 for after you bury somebody. Harmon gave a tired grunt. You're a comfort to every room you enter. Me ignored him. Her gaze moved to Adelaide and stayed there for one quiet second. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her. Good. You're still on your feet. I am. Stay that way. Inside the sack were jars of black powder wrapped in dishcloths. By evening there were 5 of them in the house. Elias, Adelaide, Harmon, Jonah, me. Near dusk a lean man with restless hands and a gambler's face came in through the back with no one hearing his approach. He called himself Reed. Elias later told her that was probably not the name his mother gave him, but it was the one the territory knew. Fast smile, faster knife. A habit of disappearing when the law rode in and appearing when the odds turned dangerous. He tipped his hat at Adelaide and set a folded sheaf of papers on the table. Freight tallies from Ash Creek, he said. Took some charm and a clerk who drinks past reason. You steal these? Harmon asked. Reed looked offended. Borrowed them from bad men. Theft needs innocence somewhere in the chain. The light outside faded while they gathered around the table. Elias spread out his old map. Adelaide opened the red notebook. Reed laid down the freight sheets. Jonah marked patrol guesses with a thick carpenter's pencil. Me sat with her hands folded until someone said something foolish. Then she corrected it with brutal calm. At first Adelaide only listened. She watched how Elias handled the room. Not loud, not trying to own every thought. He asked questions and let people finish. When he disagreed, he did it flat and plain. The others followed him, but not like sheep. Like people who had seen him stay standing longer than most. Jonah tapped the map with one blunt finger. Rourke's main house here, bunkhouse north, feed shed west. Freight wagons cut through this wash twice a week. 3 times now, Reed said. Extra run added last month. Me narrowed her eyes. Why? Didn't say on the papers. Adelaide looked at the figures. Flour, salt, lamp oil, whiskey, too much of some, not enough of others. Then she saw it. Weight tallies that did not match the listed goods. Crates marked feed that weighed far too heavy. Medical supplies logged to places with no doctor. Women's clothing sent in bulk to ranch camps where no wives lived. Her stomach turned cold. Not cattle, she said. The others looked at her. She ran one finger down the page. These wagons are carrying people. No one spoke for a beat. Me was first. You sure? Adelaide nodded. I saw signs of it before at Dobson's. Girls moved between camps. names never written twice. Dobbs thought they might be paying off debt with flesh. I think it's worse than that. Jonah's jaw worked hard enough to show the old scar pale. Elias did not take his eyes off the paper. Route. Adelaide pointed to the south road, then the cut through Stonewash Canyon. This narrows here. High walls. One way through if you stop a wagon right. Reed leaned closer. That's an ambush ground. No, Elias said. It's a rescue ground if she's right. The room changed then. Revenge had been one shape. This was another, not smaller, bigger. Harmon sat back in his chair and scrubbed a hand over his face. I came here to keep fools from bleeding out. Somehow I've joined a war. Me gave him a look. You noticed late. They worked until the lamp oil burned low. By the end of it the plan had bones. First they needed proof from the ranch itself, something stronger than grief and rumor. A ledger, names, payments, deputies bought, judges fed. Whoever held the books held the throat of half the county. If they got the ledger, the Rurks could not hide behind respectability much longer. Then they would strike the freight line. Not before. When the meeting broke, Jonah took the bunkhouse. Reed vanished into the barn loft because, as he put it, roofs heard trouble before floors did. Me accepted the front room chair and slept with a shotgun across her lap like she had been born that way. Harmon took the back room again with medicine at hand and misery in every joint. Adelaide stepped out onto the porch because the house had become too full of breath and heat. Night had spread wide over the ranch. Crickets sang low in the grass. Somewhere near the creek a coyote called once and fell silent. The land smelled of dust, sage, and distant water. Elias joined her after a minute. He leaned one shoulder against the porch post and looked out over the dark as though measuring how much of it belonged to him and how much never would. You should be inside, he said. So should you. That line's getting worn. It still fits. For a while neither spoke. The quiet between them had changed over the last 2 days. Not empty now. Full of things neither of them rushed to name. Adelaide looked toward the far field where the wind moved through the grass in pale waves. You trust all of them. I trust what they lost. She turned that over. It made sense, maybe more sense than trust built on kindness. My brother used to say grief tells the truth about people, she said. Some get smaller, some get sharper. Elias glanced at her. What did you get? She thought of the closet, of Silas on the pine tree, of Dobbs on the floor, of the ride through darkness with bullets splitting the night. I got tired of being prey. His gaze stayed on her a second longer than before. Not pity, not softness, something deeper and more careful. He looked away first. Ruth used to come out on this porch when storms rolled in, he said after a moment. Said she liked seeing what the sky was trying to decide. Adelaide followed his eyes to the horizon. Clouds were building there, low and thick over the south line. You still talk about her like she's in the next room. Some days it feels that way. And some. He took a slow breath. Some days it feels like she died an hour ago. Adelaide rested her hand on the porch rail. The wood was cool under her palm. Silas used to laugh when I cheated men at cards. Said I smiled too sweet for anyone to notice the trick. I can still hear it sometimes. That laugh makes it hard to remember he died ugly. Elias nodded once, the kind of nod a person gave when words could only make grief smaller, not lighter. A rider came just before midnight. Reed dropped from the barn roof first and hit the ground without sound. Elias had his rifle by the time the horse reached the yard. Jonah stepped from the bunkhouse shadows. Me opened the front door with the shotgun already leveled. Adelaide stood behind Elias on the porch, one hand on the post, the other wrapped around her pistol. The rider raised both hands before anyone told him to. It was a boy, 17 maybe, stringy hair, dust-caked face. Circle R livery coat too big through the shoulders, fear pouring off him like sweat. Don't shoot, he called. I ain't here for them. Elias did not lower the rifle, then speak quick. The boy swallowed hard and slid from the saddle. My name's Theo Lark. I worked the South Corrals at the Rurk place till last week. I heard folks talking in the bunkhouse. heard enough to know what comes through the freight line, heard enough to know that girl in Cedar Run weren't meant to live. Adelaide went still. Theo's eyes found her and widened with recognition, but he kept talking. They're moving the ledger tomorrow night. Barrett thinks the ranch ain't safe no more after Cedar Run. Says he's sending the books and the cash box north to the old rail depot outside Dry Hollow till things cool. Elias and Adelaide looked at each other at the same time. When? Elias asked. Moonrise, 2 wagons, 6 riders, Wade leading. Why tell us? Theo looked down, then back up. There was shame in his face now. Because my sister disappeared last winter after they hired her into the kitchen. Because I told myself not to ask. Because I found one of her ribbons in a crate marked lamp parts and still kept feeding their horses 2 more months like a coward. Me was the first to move. She stepped down off the porch, took the boy's reins, and tied the horse herself. It was not comfort, it was acceptance. Come inside, she said. You can hate yourself after you help us. Once the door shut and the lamps were lit low again, the whole plan changed. No more waiting to see. Tomorrow night they would take the ledger. And if God had left any justice in that hard country, they would rip the Rourke Empire open by the root. They spent the next day getting ready for a thing none of them could undo. No one called it that. Men and women like these did not waste breath dressing danger in grand language. They checked rifles, counted cartridges, cut strips of cloth for binding wounds before the wounds were there. Me packed black powder into 2 short tin cylinders and wrapped them in canvas. Jonah filed down a bent trigger spring at the table with the same attention he might have given a horseshoe. Reed cleaned his knife, then cleaned it again, like nerves came off with the oil. Dr. Harmon moved through the room behind them all, muttering about fools and blood loss, and how none of this improved his opinion of mankind. Adelaide sat near the window with the red notebook in her lap and Theo's directions spread open beside it. Every few minutes, she looked toward the South Hills, as though the land itself might shift under the weight of what was coming. The pain in her side stayed with her from the ride and the escape, but it had changed shape. It no longer owned her breath the way it had before. The body learned. The body hardened. That did not make it kind. Elias came in from the barn around mid-morning with a coil of rope, 2 saddle blankets, and a long silence wrapped around him. He set the rope down and looked at the papers in front of her. Show me again. She pointed to the trail Theo had marked with a blunt pencil. The wagons leave the main house yard after moonrise. They cut north through Cotton Bend, then cross the wash below Dry Hollow. If they're moving a ledger and a cash box, Barrett won't trust just anybody to guard it. Wade will ride close. Maybe one more he favors. The others will spread around the second wagon. What about Barrett himself? Elias asked. Theo, who had been standing near the stove turning his hat in his hands, answered first. He don't ride unless he must. Thinks dirt is for other men, but if he believes trouble's coming, he may send that quiet one. Adelaide looked up, the one who watches. Theo nodded. Name's Harlan Cobb, used to be something in the war. Folks say he can gut a man without wrinkling his shirt. The room cooled around that name. Adelaide had heard the voice in nightmares already. Now it had a face to fit in the dark. She wrote the name on a blank corner of the page and pressed hard enough to nearly tear through. Elias saw it. He did not tell her to stop. He only said, if Cobb rides, you stay away from him till there's no other choice. She raised her head. No. That wasn't a question. Then don't pretend it was advice. Jonah glanced up from the table. Me's mouth moved in what might have been approval. Elias stood still a moment, jaw set. You are not fully healed. And you're not the only one with a grave to answer to. That landed between them harder than either wanted. Theo looked at the floor. Reed suddenly found the window very interesting. Harmon made a soft sound in his throat, the kind older men made when they knew pain had walked into a room and taken a chair. Elias stepped closer to the table and lowered his voice. This is not about proving what you can survive. Adelaide met him without blinking. No. It's about making sure they stop making other people survive it. They held there another beat. Then Elias looked away first. Not surrender, adjustment. Fine, he said. Then listen carefully. No heroics. No breaking from the line without a signal. We get the ledger first. We keep breathing second. Revenge comes after. Me snorted. You make it sound orderly. It won't be orderly, Elias said, but it will have a purpose. They went over the ground until everyone could have drawn it blind. Cotton Bend was too open. Dry Hollow was better. The wash below it narrowed between two low ridges and a scatter of broken boulders. A wagon could pass, but not turn easy. Jonah and me would take the east rise with the powder charges. Reed and Theo would circle west to cut off the rear riders if the convoy tried to pull back. Elias and Adelaide would strike the lead wagon where Wade was most likely to ride. Harmon would stay with the spare horses and bandages in the ravine behind them because somebody had to keep the rest from bleeding into the dirt like idiots. Still hate this plan, Harmon said. Good, me told him. Means you understand it. By late afternoon, the sky had gone white with heat. The ranch sat under it tense and still. Even the horses seemed to know the day was not ordinary. Adelaide used the quiet hour to clean the Henry rifle Elias had given her and check the chamber of her pistol twice. When she looked up, she found him standing in the doorway watching her hands. You hold that like you've carried one most of your life. My father hunted elk above Bitter Creek when I was 10. He said a rifle should feel like an arm you were born with. What happened to him? Mine collapse, she said. Not the dramatic kind, just timber rot and bad luck. He went under and stayed there. Elias nodded once. My father got trampled moving cattle in spring mud. Men die stupid in the West. They do. She set the rifle across her knees. And women die because stupid men think they can. His face changed then, only a little but enough. Something hard and old moved behind his eyes. I won't let that happen tonight. Adelaide almost said you can't promise that. The words rose and stopped. He knew that already. He was not offering a guarantee. He was offering himself. There was a difference. Instead, she said, then don't die first. One corner of his mouth shifted. Not a smile, near it. When the sun began to sink, they ate in silence. Beans, cold biscuits, coffee black as soot. Theo could barely keep food down. Reed ate like a man heading into weather. Jonah folded his napkin after as neatly as if he were at Sunday supper. Me checked the fuse length on the powder one last time. Harmon lined up his bandages on the table and looked angry at each strip. They rode out at dusk. The land south of Dry Hollow rolled away in long pale folds, all sage and stone and old creek beds, with the last light turning the ridges copper. Adelaide rode beside Elias at first, saying nothing. The pain in her side flared with each long stretch of trot, but she kept her seat steady. The sky deepened. The first star came out, then another. Somewhere far off a hawk cried once and gave way to night. They reached the wash with enough light left to place themselves. Jonah and me climbed to the east rise with the powder. Reed and Theo vanished into the west brush with the spare horses. Harmon took position in the back ravine, his muttered complaints fading into the dark. Elias and Adelaide waited behind a line of split stone near the trail where the lead wagon would have to slow. Moonrise came silver and thin. Then the sound followed, wheels first, iron rim on rock, then harness creak, then hooves. 6 riders just as Theo had said, one lead wagon, one behind it, lanterns hooded low. Men talking in short, careless bursts the way men did when they thought fear belonged to other people. Adelaide felt her breath go tight, then forced it loose again. She knew that laugh in the lead, Wade Rourke. Even after all that had happened, his voice still carried swagger like a disease. Elias touched her sleeve once, not to steady her, to mark the moment. The lead wagon rolled into the narrow cut. Jonah lit the fuse. The first blast hit the east ridge and sent a rain of stone crashing across the trail behind the second wagon. Horses screamed. Men cursed. The rear team reared and twisted. Reed's shot came from the west at almost the same instant, dropping the back guard clean off his saddle. Chaos did the rest. Elias rose from behind the stones and fired into the air above the lead team. The mules panicked and jerked sideways. The wagon slewed hard across the wash, blocking the trail. Adelaide moved with him, fast despite the pain, rifle already shouldered. Down. Elias shouted, "Throw your guns and live." Wade answered with a shot. The bullet hit the rock near Adelaide's cheek and sprayed grit into her face. She dropped to one knee and fired back. A rider on the left side folded over his horse's neck and slid off into the dust. Then she saw Wade clearly. Thick shoulders, beard, hat brim low. One hand on the reins, the other reaching for a second pistol. He recognized her at the same time she recognized him. For one raw second, the whole world narrowed to that. "Should have stayed in the closet," he called. Adelaide fired. His horse jumped sideways at the crack and the shot tore through his upper arm instead of his chest. He roared and nearly fell, catching himself on the saddle horn. Elias was already moving toward the wagon. Another rider came at him from the dark, and they hit each other in a knot of arms and leather and cursing. Elias smashed the shotgun stock into the man's mouth, wrenched the pistol free, and turned just in time to fire at the lantern swinging from the lead wagon. It burst, throwing oil and flame under the axle. Not enough to burn the ledger. Enough to light the ground and blind everyone near it. Mee's shotgun boomed from the ridge. Jonah's next shot dropped the driver of the rear wagon as he tried to cut the trapped team loose. Reed came out of the brush like something born there and dragged a screaming guard off the trail. Adelaide ran for the lead wagon. Pain knifed through her ribs. She ignored it. Wade was somewhere to her right shouting orders through blood and fury, but the wagon mattered first. She caught the side rail, hauled herself up, and found 2 lockboxes beneath a tarp along with 3 heavy books wrapped in oilskin. There. The ledger had weight to it. Evil always did. A shadow moved behind her. She turned with the pistol already coming up and found Harlan Cobb standing at the rear of the wagon, one side of his face silvered by moonlight, eyes flat as pond ice. No hurry in him. No rage. That was worse. "So," he said quietly, "you weren't dead after all." His voice hit her like a blow to the spine. The closet, the lantern, his boot in her hair. Adelaide fired first. He moved first. The bullet grazed his shoulder. He came over the wagon rail with a knife in his hand and slammed into her hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. They hit the boards together. Pain exploded through her side. The ledger slid loose. Cobb's knife flashed down. She caught his wrist with both hands. The blade hung an inch above her throat. "You took a long time to come back," he murmured. She drove her knee up into his ribs. He grunted. The knife dipped closer. Then Elias was there. He hit Cobb from the side with such force that all 3 of them crashed off the wagon into the dirt. The knife flew. Cobb rolled up fast, quicker than a man his age should move, and pulled a second blade from his boot. Elias drew his revolver, but Wade shouted from somewhere near the mules and fired wild into the wash. The shot went wide. The confusion bought Cobb 1 heartbeat. He took it, slashing across Elias' forearm before vanishing into the dark on the west side of the trail. "Cobb!" Adelaide shouted, trying to rise. Elias caught her shoulder. "No." "The ledger." She twisted back toward the wagon. Mee had already gotten to it first. The books were in her arms. Reed was cutting the frightened lead team loose. Jonah and Theo had the surviving guard on his face in the dust with a boot on his neck, and Wade Rourke was gone. Adelaide spun toward the north trail and saw him in the moonlight, hunched low over his saddle, one arm hanging useless, riding hard for open country. Rage tore through her so clean it almost felt cold. Elias looked down at the blood on his arm, then at her, then toward the escaping rider. "We can track him." She shook her head once and clutched the ledger to her chest as Mee passed it down. "First we open this." No one argued, because the real wound had never been one man on a horse. It had always been the whole rotten thing he rode for. By the time they pulled back into the ravine with the books, the wash behind them was littered with dropped guns, 1 dead guard, 2 captured men, and the smoking remains of everything Wade Rourke thought would stay hidden. And Adelaide knew with a certainty that sat deeper than pain that once they read what was in those ledgers, there would be no going back for any of them. They did not wait until morning. The ledgers were opened that same night in the back room of Elias Mercer's ranch house, with one lamp burning low and every window covered. Dust still clung to their boots. Blood still marked Elias' sleeve where Cobb's knife had cut him. Adelaide's side throbbed so hard it made her teeth ache. None of it mattered once me unwrapped the oilskin and laid the books on the table. Names filled the pages, not just freight tallies, not just cattle counts. Names. Girls marked by age, hair color, and where they had been taken from. Payments made to deputies. Bribes to court clerks. Land deeds pressed from widows who could not read the contracts they signed. Entries for boys sent to labor camps. Entries for women placed in bunkhouses or freight crates. Some names had marks beside them, crosses in red, double lines in black, notations that made Harmon's face go gray, and Jonah gripped the back of his chair so hard the wood creaked. Theo sat with his hat in both hands and stared at the pages like he wanted them to swallow him whole. Reed turned one ledger toward the lamp and let out a low breath. "This is enough to hang half the county." "No," me said, "this is enough to hang the right half." Adelaide kept reading until her vision blurred. There were names she recognized from Cedar Run and Flint Hollow, girls who had vanished. Women nobody looked for long because the town had learned the cost of caring too openly. Near the center of the second book she found one that made her hand stop. Silas Voss, property interference, marked and removed, no flourish, no extra line, just 4 words that flattened the room around her. Elias saw her face change. He came around the table and looked down at the page beside her. For one moment neither moved. Then he laid his hand over the ledger and closed it gently. "Enough for now." Her throat worked once. "No." "Adelaide." I said no. The word came out raw but steady. She opened the book again with fingers that did not quite shake. "If I stop now, then they still own the way this ends." Elias held her gaze. Then he nodded and stepped back. They found Barrett Rourke's seal near the back pages. Signed orders, freight instructions, names of judges and merchants. One page listed a scheduled transfer of land deeds and cash notes to the old rail depot near Dry Hollow. Another listed the movement of girls north before first thaw, dates, routes, men assigned to escort them. More proof than any court could pretend not to see. When dawn finally touched the windows, the plan had changed for the last time. Reed would ride with Theo and the ledgers to Judge Ellison in Laramie, the one Dobson had once trusted. Harmon would go with them because wounded witnesses and honest doctors mattered more in a courtroom than angry rumors. Me and Jonah would stay with the ranch and keep watch in case Barrett struck back before the law could move. That left one thing unfinished. Wade Rourke was still alive. Barrett Rourke was still alive. And Harlan Cobb was somewhere between them like a blade left in a wound. Me did not argue when Adelaide said she was riding. She only stepped close, adjusted the sling of the rifle on her shoulder and said, "Then finish it clean." Jonah handed Elias a fresh bandage for his arm. "Bring back fewer holes than last time." Harmon looked at them both as if disgust were easier than worry. "If either of you dies after I spent half my night keeping you upright, I will be offended beyond reason." That almost drew a smile from Adelaide. Almost. They rode south by sunrise. The trail out of Dry Hollow ran along broken ridges and narrow cuts where hoofprints held in the dust. Wade had bled from the arm. Barrett likely had not waited long after the convoy failed. Men like him always ran to whichever stronghold still had walls. That left the main house or the old line shack near Ash Creek. Elias guessed the house. Adelaide guessed the same. By noon they reached the rise above the Rourke spread. Smoke drifted from one chimney. Horses stood saddled in the yard. Too few men moved below. Barrett had either sent riders out in panic or pulled his remaining loyal ones close. Either way, the ranch no longer looked powerful. It looked cornered. Adelaide lay flat in the grass beside Elias and watched the yard through the rifle sight. There. Wade sat in a chair on the porch, his wounded arm tied across his chest, a bottle at his boot. Even at a distance, anger rolled off him like heat. Barrett stood near the door talking to one of the house guards, tall, broad, dressed cleaner than any man with blood that foul deserved. No Cobb in sight. "They know someone's coming," Elias said. "They just don't know it's the end." She lowered the rifle and looked toward the feed shed, the smokehouse, the side entrance, all the paths she had learned by pain and memory. The storm drain beneath the stable crossed her mind for one hard second. Then she let it go. That was the road of the hunted girl. She had not come back as prey. "We go through the front," she said. Elias studied her face. "You certain?" "Yes." So they rode straight down the hill in full view. The yard saw them late because fear had already thinned the men there. A shout rose first, then another. Barrett stepped off the porch and froze when he recognized Adelaide. Wade lurched to his feet, bottle forgotten. Elias and Adelaide stopped 10 yards from the steps. Barrett recovered first. Men like him always did. He spread his hands slightly as if civility still meant something. "You should have stayed gone." Adelaide swung down from the saddle. The pain in her side was there, but smaller now than what drove her forward. "You said that before." Wade spat into the dust. "I should have carved deeper." Elias dismounted beside her, rifle in hand. "Drop your guns." The 2 guards near the door hesitated. One looked at Barrett. The other looked at Adelaide and seemed to understand all at once how thin this moment had become. Barrett smiled, and there was no soul in it. "You think 2 people can end this?" "No," Adelaide said. "The ledger ends it. We're just here for the rest." Something flickered in Barrett's eyes then. Real fear, fast and bright. He reached for his pistol. Adelaide fired first. The shot caught him high in the chest and drove him back against the porch post. Wade roared and went for his gun with the good hand. Elias' rifle cracked once, clean and flat. Wade dropped hard onto one knee, then onto his face in the dust where he'd left too many others. One of the guards threw down his weapon at once. The other fired from the doorway. Adelaide barely saw the muzzle flash before Elias stepped across her line and shot the man through the shoulder, spinning him into the frame. She turned at the same instant, knowing without seeing. Cobb came out of the side yard with the knife already in motion. He moved fast, too fast for a wounded man. His burned shoulder seemed not to matter. The blade flashed for Elias' ribs. Adelaide fired, but Cobb twisted. The shot tore through his side and still he came on. Then he was close enough for faces again. Close enough for her to smell lamp oil and old leather and remember a boot in her hair. He drove into Elias and the 2 men crashed against the porch rail. Elias hit hard, lost the rifle, caught Cobb's wrist with both hands as the knife angled down. Adelaide ran for them with pain ripping through her side. Cobb saw her coming and smiled that same dead smile he must have worn in the closet. She drew her pistol, but he shoved Elias sideways, spoiling the shot. So she did the simpler thing. She took the fallen branding iron leaning near the steps, still black from some earlier use, and swung it with both hands. It struck Cobb across the temple with a sound like wet wood splitting. He staggered once. She struck him again. This time he fell. For a moment no one moved. The yard held still except for the horses stamping at the smell of blood. Elias pushed himself upright slowly, chest heaving. Adelaide stood over Cobb with the iron in her hands and looked down until she was sure he would never rise again. Then she let the iron fall. Barrett Rourke was dying against the porch post, fingers wet at his shirt front, eyes fixed on Adelaide as if he still could not believe she had come back alive. She climbed the steps and stopped in front of him. "You marked people like property," she said. "You buried names and thought the ground would keep your secrets." His lips moved, maybe to curse, maybe to beg, she did not care which. "You were wrong." He slid down the post and did not speak again. Silence came over the place after that. Not peace, just the end of noise. By sundown the sheriff from Miller's Gap rode in with 3 deputies and an arrest order already carrying Judge Ellison's seal. Reed and Theo had done their work fast. Harmon's testimony had reached the right ears. The ledgers had broken more than one man's courage. The guards who survived started talking before they were even asked twice. Me and Jonah arrived before dark with extra horses and news that warrants were already spreading. Freight lines seized. Accounts frozen. Names being read aloud in rooms that had always kept them hidden. The house was searched. The cellars opened. Documents carried out in armloads. In the orchard behind the smokehouse they found shallow graves enough to turn every stomach present. The county would be digging for weeks. That night Adelaide stood on the ridge above the ranch while the last of the light drained from the west. The land below looked the same as it had yesterday. Fences, corrals, dry grass. Nothing in the shape of it told the truth about what had lived there. Maybe that was the way of evil. It borrowed ordinary things and hid in them until someone dragged it into daylight. Elias came up beside her and stopped without touching. "It's over," he said. She looked out across the darkening land. "The killing is." He nodded once. "The rest takes longer." That was true. Grief did not end because the right man bled. Fear did not vanish because the law finally found a spine. Some scars stayed. Some names stayed too. After a while she said, "I don't know where I go now." Elias was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "You don't have to decide tonight." She turned and looked at him. The wind moved through the grass between them. His arm was bandaged. His face was tired. There was blood on one cuff he had not yet washed out. He looked like a man who had buried too much and still stood anyway. No grand words came. None were needed. Adelaide stepped closer and rested her head just for a moment against his shoulder. He did not move. Below them, lanterns glowed near the house where deputies kept watch over the wreck of the Rourke name. Above them, the first stars came out one by one over a country that had seen too much pain and would see more still. But for the first time in a very long while, Adelaide Voss did not feel hunted when night fell. She felt tired, hurt, changed, and alive.